God versus gods, the unseen war of the 10 plagues. We've all heard the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt. We usually see it as a tale of a stubborn king and the divine punishments sent to free an enslaved nation. But what if that's only half the story? What if this wasn't just a showdown between two men, Moses and Pharaoh, but a carefully orchestrated war? A supernatural conflict where each plague, according to many theological interpretations, was a targeted strike against the ancient and powerful gods of Egypt. This is the story of how the god of an enslaved people could be seen as systematically dismantling an entire pantheon, not with swords and shields, but with water, frogs, darkness, and death. This is the unseen war of the 10 plagues. The central claim in the story of Exodus isn't just that God could free the Israelites, but that he would do it in a way that left no doubt who held ultimate power. When Pharaoh famously asks Moses, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice?" The 10 plagues that follow are the thunderous answer. Many theological readings frame this as a divine showdown. The Bible itself is quite clear on this point in Exodus 12:12, where God says, "Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments." This wasn't random chaos. This was, in this reading, a divine war fought on a spiritual battlefield. And for the gods of Egypt, it was a war they were destined to lose. Section 1. The first strike, the arrogance of the river gods. The war begins at the very heart of the Egyptian empire, the Nile River. The Nile was everything to Egypt. It was their source of water, their irrigation for crops, and their highway for commerce. For the Egyptians, the river was divine, the literal lifeblood of their civilization. They worshipped several deities connected to it, most notably Hapi, the god of the annual flood that made their lands fertile, and Khnum, the guardian god of the Nile's source. Some later interpretations even connected the Nile's life-giving power to Osiris, the god of the underworld and rebirth. So the first plague was a masterstroke of symbolic warfare. At God's command, Moses strikes the water, and the entire river turns to blood. The fish die, the water becomes putrid and undrinkable, and the very symbol of Egyptian life becomes a vessel of death. In this interpretation, Hapi, Khnum, and Osiris were rendered powerless. They couldn't protect their own domain. The message was clear and terrifying. The gods who were supposed to give life and sustenance were helpless before the God of Israel. Round 1 was a decisive victory, a strike against the very foundation of Egyptian power and faith. Section 2. The humiliation of life and earth. As if the first plague wasn't enough, the assault continued, targeting the concepts of life and fertility. The second plague brought an overwhelming swarm of frogs from the now defiled river. While the Egyptians' own magicians could summon more frogs, a key detail from the text notes it was only Moses, through his intercession with God, who could make them go away. The targeted deity here, according to many theological readings, was Heket, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, who was depicted with the head of a frog. Frogs were a symbol of life for the Egyptians, but this plague twisted that symbol, turning a sign of blessing into a suffocating curse. Heket, the supposed bringer of life, was mocked by a tide of her own sacred animal. With the gods of water and fertility reeling, the third plague attacked the land itself. The dust of the earth transformed into swarms of gnats or lice, tormenting everyone. Some interpreters see this as a direct challenge to Gebur, the Egyptian god of the earth. By turning the very soil under their feet into a source of affliction, God demonstrated his authority over a domain Geb was meant to rule. This plague also marked a turning point. For the first time, Pharaoh's magicians had to admit defeat, telling him, "This is the finger of God." The power on display was beyond anything they could conjure or comprehend. Section 3. The invasion of sacred symbols. The conflict escalated with the fourth plague, swarms of flies. According to the biblical account, these weren't just ordinary flies. They were a destructive force that swarmed the homes of the Egyptians, but, crucially, left the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, completely untouched. A common interpretation suggests the deity being challenged was Khepri, the god of creation, often depicted with the head of a scarab beetle. Khepri represented the rising sun and regeneration. But here, an insect, a twisted version of his sacred symbol, brought torment and decay, not life. With the fifth plague, the war moved to Egypt's wealth and symbols of divine power, their livestock. A deadly pestilence struck the Egyptians' horses, donkeys, camels, and cattle, while the Israelites' animals remained unharmed. This was a huge economic blow, but its symbolic power was even greater. Deities like Ahathor, the mother goddess often shown as a cow, and Apis, the sacred bull deity, were central figures in Egyptian worship, representing protection and strength. Their idols were now surrounded by the stench of death. The gods who took the form of cattle were proven unable to protect the very animals they symbolized. Section 4. The attack on health and the heavens. The assault then turned personal, striking the bodies of the Egyptians themselves. The sixth plague brought agonizing boils that afflicted both people and the remaining animals. Many see this as a direct refutation of the powers of Isis, the goddess of medicine and healing, and Sekhmet, the fierce lion-headed goddess believed to both cause and prevent epidemics. According to the narrative, even Pharaoh's magicians were covered in boils, unable to stand before Moses. The gods of healing were shown to be utterly incapable of offering any protection or cure. With the earth, its creatures, and its people afflicted, the seventh plague laid siege to the sky. A terrifying storm of hail and fire rained down on Egypt, a weather event described as highly unusual for the region. This celestial assault is often interpreted as a challenge to the sky deities. Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Shut, the god of the air. The storm was brutally precise, destroying crops and people left in the open. But again, the story emphasizes that the land of Goshen was spared. The gods who supposedly ruled the heavens were unable to stop the destruction sent by a higher authority. Section 5. The annihilation of order and light. What little the hail had left, the eighth plague consumed. A dense swarm of locusts descended on Egypt, devouring every remaining plant. This plague is often read as a blow against Seth, the god of storms and disorder, and Osiris, whose domain also included agriculture. Seth was meant to be a force of chaos, yet he was powerless to stop this divinely ordered destruction. The locusts left Egypt a barren wasteland, a stark demonstration that the gods of the harvest and the storm couldn't protect Egypt's food supply. Then came perhaps the most psychologically terrifying plague, a profound and suffocating darkness that covered Egypt for 3 days. It was a darkness so absolute the Bible says it could be felt. This wasn't just an absence of light, it was a supernatural event, and its target, in this interpretation, was unmistakable. Ra, the sun god, the most powerful and revered deity in the Egyptian pantheon. The pharaoh himself was often titled Son of Ra. Ra's daily journey across the sky represented the victory of order over chaos. By plunging the nation into a paralyzing darkness, the God of Israel demonstrated his authority over Egypt's chief deity. He could, in essence, snuff out the sun. Climax, the final judgment, the death of a god-king. The first 9 plagues had, from a theological perspective, systematically dismantled the authority of Egypt's gods. But the 10th and final plague was the devastating climax, a strike against the heart of Egyptian identity and the divine institution of the pharaoh. While the nature of the pharaoh's divinity was complex and evolved over time, the king was widely seen as a divine intermediary on earth, an embodiment of Horus and a son of Ra, whose own heir was key to divine succession. The 10th plague was the death of every firstborn in Egypt, from the lowest servant to the firstborn son of Pharaoh himself. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was the ultimate theological statement. Many interpret it as a final judgment against Pharaoh's own claim to divinity, and against Osiris, the judge of the dead. The supposed God-king was unable to protect his own heir, shattering the illusion of his power. The protector gods of Egypt were silent. For the Israelites, however, there was a path to salvation. By sacrificing a lamb and marking their doors with its blood, they were spared. This act of faith showed that their deliverance came not from a pantheon of fallible deities, but from the singular, all-powerful God who had just won a war against an entire empire's belief system. Conclusion. The 10 plagues of Egypt were far more than just a series of escalating disasters. When viewed through this theological lens, they become a powerful narrative of a divine war. Each plague can be interpreted as a calculated move in a spiritual chess match designed to expose the weakness of Egypt's most revered gods. From the blood in the Nile to the darkness that smothered the sun, it was a systematic dismantling of a worldview, proving that the gods of nature, fertility, and even Pharaoh himself held no power. The story culminates not just in the freedom of a people, but in the declaration of a profound truth that would echo through history. That behind the power of empires and the idols of men, there is one sovereign God who stands above all. The unseen war had been won, not by might of arms, but by the undeniable power that answered Pharaoh's challenge and proved its supremacy over all the gods of Egypt. If this story of divine conflict and hidden meanings fascinates you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next exploration into the epic stories of history and faith. And if you think there are other hidden battles in these ancient texts, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.